Across the United States, inside ordinary classrooms, something unusual unfolded. Researchers, quiet, credentialed, and backed by prestigious institutions that you've definitely heard of, walked straight into public schools. They accessed student files, they recruited teachers, they ran experiments inside classrooms, all without parental knowledge, without student consent. And the purpose? To test children for psychic ability. This isn't internet folklore, this isn't rumor. This is documented, buried in academic journals, hidden in federal archives, and scattered throughout decades of parapsychological research. People talk about this rabbit hole, but no one has ever proven it. Not until now. One CIA document led to another, and then another, until a paper trail started forming. A paper trail so bizarre, so quietly threaded through American education that it shouldn't exist. Yet it does, and it has for decades. What you're about to watch is the full story, my entire investigation, so far. Every time I upload a new piece to the puzzle, people tell me they've had to rewatch the earlier videos just to keep up. Some even say they're afraid to forget details because new revelations sometimes depend on the context of the last. So this compilation, this is the master key. All the context, all the evidence, plus some extra commentary I've never shared publicly. I'm not saying this happened to everyone, but it happened a lot, more than you think. I'm talking year after year since 1937, across thousands of classrooms stretching at least until the early 2000s. And recently I uncovered connections that tie these operations directly to gifted and talented programs. Some of these connections will surface in this video, others I'm saving for what's coming next. And speaking of next, if you're invested in the gifted and talented program rabbit hole or the secret psychic testing that happened in public schools, me and Danny from Wicked Mysterious have launched a dedicated podcast where we deep dive and investigate the rabbit hole weekly. If you don't want to join, no worries, everything will eventually make its way onto the channel. It's just going to take more time because I do everything on the channel and it takes a long time to make a video. The links are in the description. Come hang out. Our first episode is dropping, I think in a day or two. With all of that said, now let's start at the beginning. The moment that I found the first undeniable proof buried in CIA archives. I'll see you after the first video. Actually, one more thing. Across the 3 videos that I've released on the topic, over 300,000 views combined, not one teacher has ever commented. Not to correct me, not to challenge me, not even to dismiss it as nonsense. So if you're a teacher watching this, leave a comment. And if you're not, send this to one. Ask them what they think. I want to know their reaction because their voices have been missing from the story. While digging through all these strange documents about covert school experiments and becoming increasingly engrossed in the seemingly endless rabbit hole, I stumbled into a project that feels like it belongs in the same universe. It's called The Book, the ultimate guide to rebuilding civilization. If you're a book lover, this is a must. And if you don't own any books, let this be your first. It's 400 plus pages of humanity's greatest inventions, discoveries, and breakthroughs, illustrated in a wild fusion of hand-drawn, incredibly detailed medieval art. But at the same time, all of the information is incredibly practical. The book covers 180 topics, from tools and machines to medicine, society, the inner workings of firearms, photography, yoga, psychotherapy, tattoos, and this isn't even the half of it. As soon as I saw pages teaching you how to make penicillin, I knew that I had no idea where this book was going at all. And that feeling lasted the entire time. It's presented in a way that sparks a primal curiosity and deepens your appreciation for things you normally wouldn't think about. I was having a pint of Guinness after learning about the process of making beer, and it made me enjoy the pint just a little bit more. The book was created by Hungry Minds, an international collective of artists, scientists, architects, and designers. The kind of people who would absolutely build a civilization from scratch if you dropped them in the wilderness. The project blew up on Kickstarter and Indiegogo. We're talking 2.3 million raised, 50 plus experts involved, and it ended up becoming a bestseller. And when you see it, you'll understand why. The paper quality, the matte finish, the hardcover, everything is a luxury experience, and more like a museum artifact than a book. I keep it on my studio desk, and not only has it gotten many compliments based on looks alone, but it's something I keep coming back to almost any chance that I get. And here's something I'm having way too much fun with. There's actually a hidden quest inside the book itself, a secret puzzle built into the illustrations and chapters. I'm still working through it. I'm not going to spoil anything, but if you're into mysteries or secret challenges, yeah, there's something there. What I like about the book is that it bridges many worlds. If you're a technical person, it scratches that itch. If you're a history buff, into storytelling, art, body mechanics, it grabs you too. It's rare to encounter something that truly caters to all kinds of thinkers with all kinds of interests. I don't recommend things that I personally don't use or enjoy, but I can confidently say that I'd buy this book as a gift for the people I care about. If you're struggling for a gift idea this holiday season or just want a fun experience that actually makes you smarter, check out the book, The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding a Civilization by Hungry Minds. I put the link and a promo code at the top of my description and pinned comment. Or you can also scan the QR code on screen and get a copy for yourself or a loved one. Thank you to Hungry Minds for sponsoring this video. I'm sure you've heard the many covert operations, MKUltra, Project Stargate, and a myriad of others. But what about a secret operation that took place in your elementary school? Does that sound far-fetched? Because to be completely honest, I thought that too. But you don't have to take my word for it, because I brought the receipts. If you went to preschool, elementary school, middle school, high school, or even college in the United States anytime after the 1930s, this information is relevant to you because you might have been part of a secret experimentation that you knew nothing about. You don't have to fall under any demographic, you didn't have to participate in certain classes. They tested as many children as they could. As I mentioned, I will be showing you the documents. But first, let me explain to you how I stumbled upon this information. Originally, I set out to make a video about the GATE theory. If you've never heard about it, GATE is an acronym for Gifted and Talented Education. These school programs usually serve the kindergarten to 12th grade, and former participants of these programs are.
We know that the Gifted and Talented TAG, GATE, GT program, whatever you want to call it, that was conducted in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and maybe into the 2000s, we know that they were experimenting on us.
GATE, the nefarious Gifted and Talented program. People across the internet seem to be remembering. Don't think this has been mentioned on this sub before. I recently came across some people on the internet, especially on Reddit and TikTok, claiming to have elementary school memories of these GATE, Gifted and Talented programs, that involved several exercises. The most commonly mentioned being wearing clanky 90s headphones and listening to audio clips, supposedly brainwashing them to be susceptible to out-of-body experiences / lucid dreaming. Different people are claiming to remember similar things, such as an exercise matching shapes together or reading a book upside down. One thing they all have in common is their tendency to forget most of or all of what happened in the program until later in their adult lives. Certain accounts even recall them consuming some kind of pink drink, which was said to be a drug for the memory loss. Most people mainly just remember resenting going to the program or begging their parents to let them pull out of it. Proponents of this strange story are convinced it was some kind of CIA experiment, ran from the late 80s to early 2000s. Has anyone here shared similar experiences or encountered similar stories? So naturally, I was intrigued. Former participants of Gifted and Talented programs claim that they were instructed to drink a mysterious pink liquid.
And then the last thing I can remember from this is drinking out of a paper cup this pink, thick, chalky liquid. I think they told us it was a fluoride drink to make us think it was for our teeth or something. But now I'm currently crashing out.
They claim they don't remember what they did within the program.
I've seen multiple videos recently about being in the gifted and talented program when you were in school, and how a bunch of us don't really remember what happened in there. And now that I think about it, I don't either.
And the things that they do remember are strange and non-academic, to say the least.
Some people literally remember using Zener cards, which are used to train and test psychic abilities.
I tell my husband so much about my time in the gifted and talented program. So she would have us all lay flat on our backs and close our eyes. And then she would tell us to visualize 2 or 3 different things depending on the day. Sometimes it was visualizing our own bodies or spirits leaving our bodies and looking down at ourselves. And then she would teach us to look for spirit guides and to talk to them.
But what exactly would be the point of these experimentations? Well,
if you're an 80s, 90s, early 2000s baby and you were in the GATE program, that's Gifted and Talented Education Program, I need to hear about your experience, because I went down the rabbit hole last night after I did a story on liminal spaces and back rooms, and a bunch of people were commenting like, I wonder if this is related to the GATE program, which some people think was a government program ran by the CIA to find children with telepathic or psychic abilities.
former participants of gifted and talented programs not only believe that they were tested for psychic abilities within these programs, but they also believe that they were selected for these programs based upon criteria that might indicate that they are psychic or prone to psychic phenomena. The internet is overflowing with anecdotal accounts, voicing the idea that psychic testing occurred in the classroom. This theory has been entirely anecdotal and speculation. But what if I told you that I found the proof? The proof about secret experimentations in US classrooms was hiding in CIA documents about psychic children from China. In 1978, China experienced a phenomena where children claimed to possess psychic and supernatural abilities, such as, allegedly, being able to read the contents of crumbled papers by holding the crumbled paper to their ears. They could read crumbled papers that they stuffed underneath their armpits, and were even able to read the contents of crumbled paper with their butts. No kidding. When I found out that the CIA had documents of their own research about these psychic children from China, well, shout out to Alex, because not too long after that, bingo. The CIA document is titled Human Paranormal Capabilities. It's a 94-page document from 1984 that was declassified on March 7, 2001. The documents mostly detail the observations about the psychic Chinese children. But turn to page 75, and there it is. The document details an experimentation in a Florida elementary school, and it states that the results were, quote, startling. Students in this experiment displayed results that were 86% better than the odds of chance. In fact, they loved testing in the classroom. The document states that the classroom is, quote, an extremely good place for ESP experiments. Let's slow it down a little bit. What is ESP? ESP is an acronym for extrasensory perception. ESP is also known as a sixth sense or cryptesthesia. It is a claim to paranormal ability pertaining to the reception of information that is not gained through the physical senses, but rather things sensed with the mind or intuition. The term extrasensory perception was coined by J.B. Rhine, a botanist from Duke University, to mark the presence of psychic abilities such as intuition, telepathy, clairvoyance, and other forms of sensory perception that go beyond the five senses. That document was a breakthrough in our investigation, but I didn't stop there. We investigated where those documents came from and who wrote it, and ended up finding a trove of documents that go into detail about the covert operations conducted in schools all over the US. Since at least 1937 to possibly the present day, students from preschool to college were tested in the classroom secretly. Documents show that some of the strongest psychic results have come from students with mental disabilities. Experimenters had access to student records, so they knew if you were creative, sucked at math, had behavioral issues, or moved to a different school. There are teachers out there that know about this because they participated. And if you think this is all about innocent guessing games, well, things only get more disturbing from here. Now, we are going to circle back and examine the first document, but the first document is a mere drop in the ocean of documentation that we uncovered. Here is how we found the rest. The first inclination was to investigate the person who wrote the report. That wasn't too hard to find. Right at the top, we can see that it was written by an American author named L.E. Lyons. But there was one problem. L.E. Lyons doesn't exist. We quickly found out that L.E. Lyons was a pseudonym. In fact, this is the only publication we could find under that name. But right below that, it reads, Chapter 3, Advances in Parapsychology Research. We realized that the report we found was only a tiny glimpse of what is actually 10 entire volumes, called Advances in Parapsychological Research. The first volume was published in 1978, and the latest was published on February 23, 2021. The volumes were edited by Stanley Krippner, who was heavily involved in Project Stargate. Project Stargate was a CIA operation that investigated remote viewing and other psychic phenomena for the purpose of potential military and domestic intelligence applications. It had its beginnings in 1972, and it ran until 1995. Allegedly. Some believe it never really stopped. Experimenters kept private records of children that parents knew nothing about. They had access to children's school records. There are entire chapters dedicated to all the secret ways they experimented in the classroom. Some ways appeared entirely academic, such as memory games, word association tests, drawing tests, rocket launching games, and a lot more. They also loved using Zener cards or ESP cards in the classrooms. Imagery trips that involved meditation tapes. Thousands of classrooms, thousands of students, every and any age, year by year, decade by decade. The amount of documentation is overwhelming. The volumes reveal highly disturbing things, like the fact that not only did teachers know about these experimentations, but they often participated, whether they believed in psychic phenomena or not. Documents that detail hypnosis, guided imagery trips, out-of-body experiences, and even erotic photos used in classroom ESP experiments. Substances were also used in classroom experiments. Substances like sodium amytal, a barbiturate, known to cause hypnotic effects, and it also causes memory loss. So was sodium amytal the secret ingredient in the pink liquid that former gifted and talented students remember drinking? Is it a coincidence that sodium amytal is one of the substances used in MKUltra experiments? And why did experimenters express that they preferred to work with gifted subjects? Some documents refer to them as talented. Coincidence? And why did experimenters believe that the firstborn children were the most psychic? These are just some of the questions that we'll be answering in the upcoming series, where we deep dive into every volume, and where I show you why this is the darkest rabbit hole that no one knows about. Let's take a closer look at the first document. The page is titled A General Discussion of Parapsychology. Parapsychology is the study of alleged psychic phenomena, which includes extrasensory perception, telepathy, precognition, clairvoyance, psychokinesis, also called telekinesis, and psychometry, and other paranormal claims. The document reads as follows. ESP experiments in schools. Much of the experiments carried out so far have shown The classroom is an extremely good place for ESP experiments. After results of experiments had first been reported from ESP labs, Florida elementary school teacher E. Bood noticed a report and conducted an experiment in her own class of 22 students. The night before the experiment, she made up a stack of cards numbered 1 through 10 to be drawn at random. The next day, she stood at the front of the classroom, sometimes at the back of the classroom, and every 4 or 5 seconds, she would concentrate on the number on a card. The students would write down their guesses. The results were startling. There were 371 correct answers and 2,870 guesses. This is 86% better than the odds of chance. This ratio is second highest of all experiments conducted in classrooms. The document does continue for 2 pages, specifically talking about classroom ESP experiments. Now, I'm not going to read the whole report line by line, but I'll give you a quick synopsis on each paragraph, and I'll link the report so you can read it fully for yourself as well. In 1953, a researcher from Holland was brought to the US by Duke University to conduct experiments with 23 classes of 5th and 6th graders and 17 classes of 7th and 8th graders. The younger students performed the best in this experiment, which were similar to the results of the experimentations he conducted in Holland. No further details about the experiment itself are provided. The following paragraph talks about how the success rate for ESP is based upon the student-teacher relationship. This is something that is echoed consistently in later volumes. The highest levels of ESP occur when the student likes the teacher and the teacher likes the student, and the lowest levels of ESP occur when the opposite is true. The report details an experiment with preschool students, ages 4 to 6.5. The experiments were conducted with unfamiliar students. The students didn't know the teacher, and the teacher didn't know the students. As expected, the results were not very good. Not even 1 class out of 10 achieved results better than the odds of chance. But in many of these experiments, the girls scored higher than the boys. Again, the report doesn't include details of the experiment itself. In an attempt to determine the subtle differences in levels of ESP between boys and girls, Dr. J. F. Freeman conducted experiments that took place over a number of years. The experiments were carried out with children with intellectual disabilities under the guidance of a teacher. The boys scored better than the girls, but for some reason, the teacher didn't like the girls. So the paragraph concludes, stating that the attitude of the teacher influences the success rate of the students. I'm just going to go ahead and read this next paragraph. Because the effect of gender on ESP was unclear, Freeman gave a test to some 7th graders. The girls did clearly better than the boys on the word tests, and the boys did better than the girls on the space-related tests. However, when he gave different aptitude tests to some about to finish the 7th grade, some girls, a minority, did better on the space-related questions than they did on language questions, just as the boys did. On the other hand, some boys, a minority, did poorly on the aptitude test, but did the same as the girls in guessing pictures in a book. The difference is significant. However, it is more apt to say that it is a result of different stages of psychological development than it is to say that it is a difference between the sexes. The final paragraph pertaining to classroom experiments also aimed to find differences in ESP levels between sexes. The junior high school magazine reading material attached an ESP chart that asked students to fill it out and return it. More than 100,000 students responded. The results were the same as the odds of chance. The document states that some were, quote, psychically right and some were psychically wrong, whatever the hell that means. But the results basically averaged each other out. However, the report claims that through this large mass of data, inherent proof of ESP was discovered, and it was connected to the different sexes. The girls' success rate was clearly better than the odds of chance, while the boys' results were the same as chance. While results do fluctuate between boys and girls in different experiments, the report finds that girls tend to perform better than the odds of chance, and this becomes more noticeable in larger experiments. So who was behind these classroom experimentations? Well, it wasn't necessarily schools, but rather third parties that utilize schools. The first document was found in a CIA report, and the editor of Advances in Parapsychological Research has CIA ties. But we also see institutional names behind these experiments as well. This makes perfect sense. When the CIA conducted MKUltra, they didn't just show up as the CIA. They utilized institutions such as Princeton, Harvard, and many others to front the research, and we do see some of the usual suspects. So, can you take a guess? Experimenters tested everyone, in the sense that they didn't discriminate, but this didn't occur in every school, though it did happen very frequently. How they selected which school to conduct testing, I'm still trying to figure out, but still, there are some teachers out there that know about this. I'm not sure if they signed an NDA or what, but it's true. And it's one of the more disturbing aspects about this. That was the story of how I encountered these documents, but the video left a lot of questions unanswered, which is why I created the next video. Also, I want to clarify something. The first video got some criticism, which is expected, but I noticed most who had criticism were missing the entire point. People call Advances in Parapsychological Research a fringe journal, and basically said this information is bullshit because psychic phenomena isn't real. Well, here's my response. Advances in Parapsychological Research is a collection of experiments and research that derive directly from the Journal of Parapsychology, a peer-reviewed academic journal. The Journal of Parapsychology was founded in 1937 at Duke University by J.B. Rhine. The journal is still currently active. This is where most, if not all, covert school operations are documented. Yes, psychic phenomena or parapsychology is a topic universities generally don't like, and often they don't take it seriously. In fact, Princeton had a department called Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research for almost 30 years, where they investigated psychic phenomena, mostly through machines. Now, most of the staff at Princeton notoriously hated this department and often discredited their work. But whether psychic phenomena is real or not is not the point. The point is that researchers really did infiltrate public schools and tested students secretly in the name of this research. That is the point. I addressed that and many more questions here. I'll see you after this video. A few months back, I made a video titled "You Were Experimented on in School and Never Knew It." In that video, I showed actual documented proof, not evidence, proof, that covert experiments took place in thousands of classrooms across the United States. Covert operations that have been happening since at least the 1930s, and possibly still take place in classrooms to this day. These experiments were secretly carried out in classrooms on unknowing test subjects that included preschool, elementary, high school, and college students. These experiments were testing for psychic phenomena, also known as extrasensory perception or simply ESP for short. I do want to be absolutely clear. I'm not saying psychic phenomena is real. Whether it is or isn't, you can decide that for yourself. What I am saying is that there are organizations and institutions that obviously believe it's worth the time, the money, and resources to carry out secret experiments that test for psychic ability. This isn't a theory. This isn't an ARG. This is all documented. There are school teachers completely aware about all of this. I say that because they often participated as agents in these experiments. In fact, the highest results apparently occurred when the teacher liked the student and the student liked the teacher, and the lowest results were observed when the opposite was true. Though liking a teacher only seemed to influence psychic results in children, not in high school or college students. Sometimes experiments were disguised as guessing games, drawing activities, word association tests, and other seemingly normal school tasks. And other times they were disturbing. For example, why were erotic pictures used in covert high school experiments that tested for psychic ability? Before we do touch on those deeper layers, I want to say that I fully stand by the information I provided in the video I created a few months ago. But of course, that video left you guys with a lot of questions and even some skepticism, which is totally valid. So this video is going to be a little different. I want to answer as many of your questions, address any skepticism, and leave you informed about this rabbit hole. To me, this is internet-breaking stuff, because you didn't consent or know about these experiments while you were in school, your parents didn't consent or know about these experiments, and the fact that some teachers are walking around with this secret is just crazy. By the way, I'm 100% confident that this is the very first channel to ever cover the material presented in the first video and the material I will present in this video. So if all of this sounds new, that's because it is. You're not going to hear about this on CNN or Fox. This is just independent research. Let's start here. Did these secret experiments happen in every school? No, they did not happen in every school. I'm still trying to figure out how and why certain schools were selected. What I do know is that experimenters and researchers had access to school records. Because in these documents, they knew the students' school grades. They were aware if a student was highly creative, spontaneous, had learning disabilities, behavioral issues such as aggression, whether they were extroverted or introverted, they knew what subjects the students were best at, and other characteristics and background information. I also know that they often implemented questionnaires, personality tests, Rorschach tests, intelligence tests, and other data collecting methods to further understand a student. They even tested to see if students were suggestible to hypnosis. Experimenters tried to get a sense of what kind of a thinker the student was. They wanted to know if the students liked their teacher, how they felt about their classmates, and so much more. They also kept private records of students. Now, for example, an experiment was conducted in 1979 on a class of first graders testing them for, of course, ESP. In 1982, the same researchers came back to the same school to retest the same group, but they noticed that a lot of the children who scored high during the first set of experiments had left the school. This means they kept at least basic records of children they tested. This brings an array of questions to mind. Why doesn't anyone know about this? How much information on students did they keep? And where are these documents currently sitting? To get back to the main point, no, this didn't happen in every school. So if you don't remember anything weird, it's probably because your school wasn't selected and nothing weird happened. These experiments were also meant to be covert operations, so students weren't supposed to notice. As I mentioned, experimenters tested students anywhere from preschool to the college level and every grade in between. They did focus more on elementary school students because results seemed to show that younger students scored higher on ESP experiments than older students. One more thing to mention is that these experiments took place commonly and frequently. I'm talking about thousands of classrooms every single year. Here's a few examples. In 1959, 1,228 high school students and junior college students were tested. In 1966, 591 grade school children were tested for ESP through an activity presented as a rocket launching game. A single researcher conducted classroom experiments from 1963 almost every year until 1972. Here's an example of 1,403 high school students tested in 1973 in a single study. Here's an example of 1,800 college students in 1976. You get the point. These are just a handful of examples in literally thousands upon thousands of covert classroom experiments. These covert ESP operations are well documented and go well into the 1990s and early 2000s, but I'm mostly screenshotting from a 1978 volume in this video to demonstrate how far these experiments go back. Who was behind these experiments? There were many organizations and institutions and even some independent conductors of these experiments and research. Princeton, Harvard, University of California's Department of Psychology, Duke University, just to name a few. Institutions and organizations and independent researchers were conducting various different covert classroom experiments simultaneously every year, all testing ESP with different strategies and methodologies. To put it simply, these experiments were carried out by many different people, and not just a singular group. But here's what's interesting to me. It's possible that these institutions and organizations were conducting these experiments, they got their data, and now their files are stored somewhere in their headquarters. End of story. But maybe the rabbit hole is a little deeper. Here's why. We all know about MKUltra. And for clarification, no, I am not saying these school experiments have anything to do with MKUltra. But what I'm about to say is something that's a little too convenient to ignore. We all know that the CIA was behind the MKUltra experiments. But how exactly were these experiments carried out? Were test subjects just taken to CIA headquarters and subjected to MKUltra experiments? No, they weren't. Instead, the CIA utilized institutions such as Princeton and Harvard to carry out these experiments. Coincidentally, some of the same institutions that were utilized to carry out MKUltra experiments are also some of the same institutions behind these covert school experiments. So, is it possible that the CIA was utilizing these institutions and organizations to carry out secret school experiments the same way they utilized institutions to carry out MKUltra experiments? It's possible, but this is only speculation on my part. To add to my speculation, I found the first initial batch of documents that talked about covert school experiments in a declassified CIA document, which leads us to our next topic. Why did I start looking into all of this, and how did I come across this information? Here's where a lot of confusion came from my last video, so please listen to this entire portion. Former students of gifted and talented programs have been speaking out on social media, describing strange and disturbing experiences and theories concerning their time in the program. For those who don't know, gifted and talented programs, also known by its acronym, GATE, are still implemented into some schools to this day. They're designed to identify children who display high intelligence, creativity, and/or other learning abilities, and provide specialized and advanced enrichment curriculums to further nurture those abilities. I came across a series of videos on TikTok where former students of these GATE programs are expressing concern, believing that the program had a hidden agenda. Many former students describe similar things, such as hardly remembering anything that happened in the program, almost as if they have huge memory gaps. The things that they do remember are bizarre. Many recall that their gifted and talented teacher did not belong to the school faculty. They describe playing strange guessing games, specifically stating that they remember using Zener cards, also known as ESP cards. Some remember drinking a pink drink, others say they were instructed to put on headphones and guess which ear they'll hear a tone from. Some even recall listening to the Gateway Experience, which, to put it simply, is a series of tapes developed by Robert Monroe and the Monroe Institute that are meant to induce out-of-body experiences. These are just a handful of memories former students of gifted and talented programs are sharing online. These experiences are obviously out of place in a program designed to be academic. As a content creator, I was intrigued by these videos and scoured the internet for more. Of course, I inevitably ended up on subreddits, 4chan, and other pockets of the internet where former students of gifted and talented programs speculate the reason behind these strange memories and memory gaps. Some believe this program had sinister motives, possibly connected to MKUltra, But the most popular theory among these forums and threads is that they were chosen for this program because they have psychic abilities, and the program was therefore used as a means to experiment with these children. To be fully transparent, even though I found this gifted and talented program rabbit hole interesting, I didn't believe it. In fact, originally I had about 30 minutes worth of material debunking the gifted and talented program theory. I spent months reading into educational documents on gifted and talented programs. And just as a side note, people like to say that there are no documents about gifted and talented programs, but there actually is a lot of documentation. You just have to go onto ERIC or Education Resources Information Center or even Internet Archive, and you'll find an endless trove of documents. The thing is, as you'd expect, you're not going to find anything about secret experiments that tested for psychic ability in those documents. You're only going to find standardized curriculum, learning model breakdowns, and other standardized material. For further clarification, TikTok videos and Reddit threads are not proof. They are simply anecdotal accounts. I'm not trying to invalidate anyone's memories or experiences. The only reason I feel the need to clarify this is because some people in the comments of my first school experiment video were under the impression that I was trying to pass TikTok videos and Reddit posts as proof, which was not my intention. The only reason I used TikTok videos and Reddit posts in that video was to introduce the school experiment rabbit hole, the same way that I was introduced to it. With that being said, TikTok videos and Reddit threads are the reason that I began searching for secret school experiments, but they are not part of my proof. The thing is that what I ended up finding went a lot deeper than gifted and talented programs, and at the same time, gifted and talented programs might be the deeper rabbit hole. I'll clarify this towards the end of this video, but first let me explain how I encountered my actual proof and how it changed the trajectory of my research. Again, I didn't believe the gifted and talented program theory at all, but I gave it the benefit of the doubt and still searched for any proof to support the theory. I kept in mind that people online investigating the Gates program theory believed that they were being tested for psychic ability. And I kept an eye out for any document containing any interest in psychic phenomena involving children. I ended up finding multiple documents detailing the CIA's interest in alleged psychic children from China. Upon encountering these publications, I felt that these documents were worth exploring, because logically, why would the CIA only be interested in alleged psychic children from China? Wouldn't they be interested in American children as well? Well, I found a document called Human Paranormal Capabilities, and it ended up being the breakthrough that I didn't expect. It was declassified on March 7th, 2001. It's a 94-page document, mostly detailing the CIA's observations gathered from the research group that they sent to China to test the alleged psychic children. The findings ended up not being very impressive, but beginning on page 75 of that document, a covert psychic experiment in a Florida elementary classroom is mentioned, alongside a few other classroom experiments. It details a Holland school disciplinarian named J.G. Bushback, who carried out psychic experiments in more than 100 classrooms under his jurisdiction. The results of his experiments were impressive enough for Duke University to take notice and invite him over to the United States to repeat the experiments he conducted in Holland. This led to J.G. Bushback conducting psychic experiments in the US in 23 classes of 5th and 6th graders and 17 classes of 7th and 8th graders. The results of the US experiments were similar to the results documented in Holland. The document goes on to give brief descriptions for other ESP experiments, including one in a French elementary school, another in an unnamed preschool, another set of experiments that were conducted over the course of several years that included 7th graders, and another in an unnamed junior high. Now, this document had my attention. At first, I thought the idea of secret experiments that tested for psychic ability in US classrooms was some wild conspiracy theory. But now I encountered a declassified CIA document that contained a handful of covert experiments that occurred in the US and foreign classrooms. These documents also allude to other ESP classroom experiments, so there has to be more, right? Well, there is a lot more. This CIA document is only part of my proof, but more importantly, it was my starting point. Because by further investigating the declassified human paranormal capabilities document, it led to a holy grail of further documents. So, how did I find further documents? Upon encountering page 75, the breakthrough sentence was this: "The classroom is an extremely good place for ESP experiments." This statement alone is compelling. Also, in a few minutes, I'll talk about why researchers specifically liked school classrooms for these covert operations. Examining page 75 further, we can see that the article was written by an American author, L.E. Lyons. As I stated in the previous video, L.E. Lyons is a pseudonym. L.E. Lyons does not exist. Underneath L.E. Lyons, we find that it says, Chapter 3, Advances in Parapsychological Research. I found out that Advances in Parapsychological Research is actually a series of 10 entire volumes, the first of which was published in 1978, and the latest volume was released on February 23, 2021. So, in this CIA document about psychic children from China, for some reason, they included an excerpt, only a couple of pages, that were directly taken from one book out of a series that spans 10 entire volumes. Volumes that further detail thousands and thousands of other covert school experiments across the United States. So no, I'm not creating a theory that's based off of one American school experiment or even just a couple of American classroom experiments. The declassified CIA document was simply a starting point. If you read even one of these volumes, which I'm linking volume 2 in the description for you to read, you'll see that thousands of covert school experiments in the United States are detailed. Experiments conducted by the institutions that I mentioned earlier in this video. Why was Advances in Parapsychological Research mentioned in CIA documents? The volumes of Advances in Parapsychological Research were edited by Stanley Krippner. Stanley Krippner was heavily involved in Project Stargate and does have CIA ties. Time for another clarification. I'm not saying that these covert school experiments have anything to do with Project Stargate. For those who don't know, Project Stargate was a CIA operation that investigated remote viewing and other psychic phenomena for the purpose of potential military and domestic intelligence applications. Project Stargate began in 1972 and ended in 1995. Even though Stanley Krippner was involved in Project Stargate and was also the editor of Advances in Parapsychological Research, it does not mean that the two are connected. But the fact that Stanley Krippner has CIA ties is interesting, and a potential reason why Advances in Parapsychological Research was referenced in the declassified CIA document, Human Paranormal Capabilities. I cannot say conclusively that covert school experiments that tested for psychic ability were tied to the CIA. It's a theory I'm still working on. How credible is the Advances in Parapsychological Research series? Some comments titled these books as fringe journals or even criticized them for not being peer-reviewed studies. This is likely the response of people who shrug this entire thing off because they can't fathom the idea that institutions would focus so much time, research, money, and resources on psychic phenomena. But actually, Advances in Parapsychological Research is a collection of various studies. It details all aspects of laboratory and covert classroom experiments, such as terminology, philosophy, strategy, methodology, and the overall findings of these studies. Most, if not all, the experiments detailed in the Advances in Parapsychological Research series derive from the Journal of Parapsychology, which, by the way, is a peer-reviewed academic journal. Here's the thing to understand about both Advances in Parapsychological Research and the Journal of Parapsychology. These publications were not meant for mainstream consumption. This research was only meant to circulate within academic circles, which is why you'll never find this material in public textbooks or mainstream websites. The truth is that real reputable institutions did conduct these experiments. Not maybe, they absolutely did. Princeton, the University of California, and other institutions are behind the experiments of these covert school operations. Again, whether you believe in psychic phenomena or not, the facts are that these covert operations took place in the name of science and experimentation. These operations were carried out as methodically and as scientifically as possible. Also, I wouldn't expect covert school operations that basically admit to secretly keeping private records of children and secretly testing them for psychic ability to ever become mainstream. Why would reputable institutions want to be liable or accountable for this? Can you imagine the lawsuits? So, no, you're not going to find this information on the Washington Post or any mainstream media. That doesn't mean it's any less credible. Reputable institutions have already stamped their name behind these covert operations. Duke University specifically has a long history of being interested in psychic phenomena. Why aren't there any whistleblowers? If covert school experiments took place and teachers commonly participated in these experiments, why haven't any school teachers spoken out? There has to be at least some whistleblowers, right? To be honest, I don't know why teachers haven't spoken out. My guess is that they probably signed an NDA or simply won't say anything out of fear, or maybe they just didn't think it was a big deal. When I first started looking into the gifted and talented program theory, I noticed that I never, not once, saw any gifted and talented teacher create a TikTok video or any video debunking any of the claims. I never saw any teacher say otherwise at all. I find that interesting because it seems really easy to come out as a teacher and say this never happened in classrooms, that's complete BS, but I've never come across any school teacher denying these claims. Also, even if they did deny the claims, these experiments did not happen in every school, so even if a school teacher never had first-hand experience or any participation in these experiments, there is still proof that these experiments occurred in other schools. Why schools? According to advances in parapsychological research, the classroom is an extremely good place for ESP experiments. But that still leaves the question, why secretly test children in schools? In the first chapter of Volume 2, they explain the challenges of testing for ESP in a controlled laboratory setting. Conducting psychic experiments in a controlled clinical setting requires volunteers. Even if the volunteers don't know that they are being secretly tested for psychic phenomena, the laboratory setting itself was believed to possibly influence results. The setting could be too sterile, boring, and artificial. Also, the volunteers were aware that they were participating in some sort of experiment, which made test subjects often develop anxiety, fear, or just have an overall pressure to do things correctly or quote-unquote get things right. This is also true with what researchers refer to as gifted individuals. Researchers may reach out to someone who claims to be psychic, but once they are brought to a controlled setting or simply become aware that they are being tested for their psychic ability, they completely shut down, possibly due to nerves. There have been examples where gifted individuals consistently displayed results that were above the odds of chance, but it's still overall a very finicky way to conduct experiments. Researchers also voiced the challenge of testing for psychic phenomena due to its spontaneous nature. Sometimes psychic activity seems to occur at random. Ever think of someone and in that moment they call your cell phone? How can you replicate seemingly spontaneous so-called psychic activity in a controlled manner? If I'm taking an educated guess, and this is simply speculation, the reason they like secretly testing children in schools is because it's a way to maintain a natural environment. Often children thought they were playing guessing games and typically weren't anxious to get anything right. Why so many experiments? Experimenters were incredibly thorough in laboratory and covert school operations. Every possible variable was explored, which is why there are so many documented experiments from so many different institutions. For example, While some experimenters considered factors such as exploring how children reacted to a stranger testing them versus someone who is familiar to them like a teacher, other researchers tested factors like having experimenters deliberately act friendly or unfriendly and compared the results. Others considered variables like the weather, believing that sunny and rainy days led to different psychic results, because the weather could influence what the students are wearing, which in turn influences their mood. Also, a cloudy, rainy day could affect how students perceive the world versus a bright, sunny day. Some experimenters tested for psychic ability by having children guess words. Other researchers preferred to have them draw pictures. Others preferred using techniques like guided imagery trips or guided meditation. No matter which methodology they implemented, whether they achieved positive or negative results in one experiment, they would try the same experiment on different days, changing variables like the temperature of the room, turning the lights on or off, and many other clearly thorough details. Sometimes researchers also attempted to influence results. Sometimes they promised children candy or a snack if they guessed things correctly. Other times they added pressure or deadlines to purposely rush students to see if that pressure affected psychic results. Some studies experimented by having a secret unknown person in the next room, attempting to send telepathic messages to children to see if the children somehow picked up on these telepathic messages. And other times, they attempted to influence results with secret motivators. In a high school experiment, students were unaware that there were erotic photos in an envelope. Why did researchers do this? Because some previous studies found that sex could be a psychic motivator. In multiple experiments, the experimenter was an attractive woman in a classroom of high school students. They found that the students scored higher than usual on ESP tests if the experimenter was attractive. If sex could be a potential psychic motivator, what about a sexual motivator that the students weren't consciously aware of? Could secret erotic pictures existing in the room influence psychic results? This is the reason erotic pictures were placed into an envelope that high school students were not aware of, to test if a secret sexual psychic motivator could somehow influence ESP results. Experimenters found that these erotic pictures did influence results in students who displayed lower levels of anxiety, and it was less influential to students who displayed higher levels of anxiety. A later variation of this experiment was also conducted 4 years later by a different experimenter, using, quote, beautiful and gruesome pictures. Just as a side note, imagine parents found out that this was happening inside of classrooms. With countless variables and different methods, you can see why so many experiments were implemented every year by different institutions. One of the more disturbing aspects is that substances were used in covert school experiments. There were some more innocent substances like caffeine and lactose that were used to see if they somehow influence psychic phenomena. But they also used substances like sodium amytal, a barbiturate, which causes things like memory loss and is known to produce a hypnotic effect. What's interesting about this aspect is that they don't mention the ages or grades of the students they used substances on. In almost every other experiment, the ages or school grade of the students are mentioned, but when it pertains to substances, no ages or information on the students are mentioned. Probably because it's incredibly incriminating, but very interesting. This is something that I've been probing into further, so I'll have some interesting updates for you soon. Since the last video, I've been diving into the Journal of Parapsychology, where these experiments are documented into further depth. And let's just say that these videos will get a lot crazier from here. Did I prove the gifted and talented program theory? Yes and no. What I did prove is that covert school experiments testing for psychic ability did take place. As I mentioned, this is the very first channel to ever provide this information. But the covert experiments that I found tested everyone. And by that I mean normal everyday classrooms and not specifically tied to gifted and talented programs. One of the highest scoring demographics, the mentally disabled. They even list children with thyroid conditions as commonly displaying high levels of ESP. So, I did prove that. And you can see how that's pretty much what former gifted and talented students believed happened in the program. Did I find anything about gifted and talented programs specifically? Something I did find interesting is that throughout these documents, researchers and experimenters refer to students who display high levels of psychic activity using the terms gifted and talented. This could be a coincidence, this could be evidence, but evidence isn't proof. But I did mention earlier that gifted and talented programs may be the deeper rabbit hole. Why do I say that? This is a theory I'm working on, and I think I found some corroborating evidence. Maybe general classroom experiments were part of a screening process, and maybe researchers found common characteristics of children who score high on ESP experiments. It would make sense to isolate these high-scoring children and test them further. Gifted and talented programs do remove students from their regular classroom, and they're taken to separate designated rooms. Gifted and talented programs also allow students to be taken off campus, completely separated from the school faculty and other students. I've been chipping away trying to prove the gifted and talented program theory once and for all. I've been taking a closer look at the players involved in the creation of gifted programs. I'm looking at their connections and where they got their funding from. And here's what I can promise. I am working on the deepest, most comprehensive gifted and talented program video on the internet. And hopefully, I can be the first to prove that theory with actual documentation. Did you ever play the game Space Invaders, like the video game? Well, researchers created something called Psi Invaders, which basically looked exactly like Space Invaders, except it was testing you for psychic ability. This is a great example of how sneaky they were, and how you would never really be able to tell if you were part of an experiment or not. I get comments of people being like, oh, I don't remember anything weird. You weren't supposed to notice anything weird. You know, that's why they call it covert operations, right? This is over 80 years worth of information that I'm trying to funnel and make it digestible for these videos. And every time I release a video, I get people commenting questions that I've already addressed in the previous video and so on. And that's why I reiterate information sometimes, which I'm going to try not to do in future videos, but sometimes I kind of need to. I've been investigating gifted and talented programs and their connection to the covert school experiments that went on across classrooms in the US, and I found a pretty profound connection that really proves that there's something there, and it's actually opened up a huge rabbit hole for me to present in future videos. But for now, let's get into that revelation, because I think you're going to be mind blown. If you've been following this channel, especially the school experiment deep dives, then you already know the truth that I uncovered. Covert psychic experiments were carried out in American public schools, not in secret laboratories, not in classified military bases, but in ordinary classrooms with ordinary children who had no idea that they were part of anything unusual. But these unknowing students were part of experiments that tested for psychic ability. And if you've been here a while, then you also know that this didn't start recently. These hidden operations stretch back to at least the 1930s, specifically with J.B. Rhine at Duke University. J.B. Rhine conducted a series of card guessing and telepathy experiments at Duke. By 1937, multiple reports of classroom experiments are documented, testing grade school or elementary school children under the presumption that children score higher on psychic tests than older students. As far as data is concerned, that presumption seems to be consistent. Multiple experiments report that younger students tend to score higher on these experiments than older test subjects. But these covert experiments only expanded. It wasn't just Duke University, it was many institutions, independent organizations, and even some curious teachers with access to students documented experiments of their own. These psychic experiments weren't small or isolated, they were mass-produced. Students anywhere from preschool to the college grade level were test subjects. Thousands of classrooms, thousands of students, every single year, since quite literally 1937. And there's nothing that confidently proves that they've ever stopped. Researchers quietly access student school records. This isn't speculation. Reading directly from Advances in Parapsychological Research Volume 2, it states, a related variable that has been studied as a predictor of ESP scores is school grades. Researchers kept their own off-the-record documents about students they tested, and collected personal student data without parental knowledge or consent. Well, actually, I found one study where they claimed that they got parental consent for psychic experiments that tested 1st, 3rd, and 5th grade students at a public elementary school. But even if they did get parental permission, I do wonder if they were completely honest with the parents about what they were doing. Some experiments were disguised as innocent academic activities. Word association tests, drawing exercises, guessing games, and even disguised as science-related projects. But other experiments crossed a line, like researchers hiding erotic photographs inside sealed envelopes in a high school classroom experiment, to test whether sexual imagery could somehow influence psychic perception. There were even hints that barbiturates, powerful sedatives, were used in certain trials. And yes, teachers definitely knew. They knew that researchers were secretly running psychic experiments right in their classrooms. In many cases, teachers participated. Researchers consistently found that the stronger the bond between the student and the teacher, the stronger the psychic results tend to be. This is a huge part as to why researchers loved conducting experiments in schools. One document went as far as saying that the classroom is an extremely good place for ESP experiments. See, all of these covert operations were in the name of parapsychology. Parapsychology is the study of alleged psychic phenomena, also known as extrasensory perception, or by its acronym, ESP. Extrasensory perception, or ESP, is also known as the sixth sense, or cryptesthesia, a claimed paranormal ability pertaining to the reception of information not gained through recognized physical senses, but things sensed with the mind. ESP involves phenomena such as telepathy, clairvoyance, and precognition. On its own is psychokinesis, or PK, which is moving things at a distance. And J.B. Ryan coined a term that describes all four, known as simply psi. In 1937 at Duke University, J.B. Ryan established the Journal of Parapsychology, a biannual peer-reviewed academic journal. The Journal of Parapsychology is still presently active and still publishing, and this is where a majority of covert classroom experiments are detailed. There are many other ESP experiments that have nothing to do with classrooms or students, but we're solely focusing on classroom experiments in this video series. While there are many other parapsychological organizations and academic parapsychological publications, the most prominent remains the Journal of Parapsychology. It's where psychic experiments by reputable institutions such as Princeton are published. In fact, the CIA has a declassified document called Anomalous Mental Phenomena, where it references many experiments directly from the Journal of Parapsychology. If you've watched my school experiment videos, then you know that my first breadcrumb to all of this information came from a declassified CIA document called Human Paranormal Capabilities. That single file opens a labyrinth that led me to Advances in Parapsychological Research, a 10-volume academic series. Most of the studies documented there were taken directly from, you guessed it, the Journal of Parapsychology. Equally important to all of this is Stanley Krippner, a pivotal figure that quietly bridges covert school experiments and gifted and talented programs. And this will all make sense in a few minutes. See, Krippner isn't just the editor of Advances in Parapsychological Research. Yes, these volumes are still ongoing. Krippner also documented his own psychic experiments inside its pages. He had heavy involvement with Project Stargate and undeniable CIA ties. But I also need to emphasize that Krippner's association with Stargate does not prove that school experiments were part of Project Stargate. There's no evidence linking the two. Instead, the strangest pattern I uncovered was this. All of these covert psychic experiments were done in everyday public school classrooms, not in specialized programs, not in selective tracks. Yes, sometimes some researchers refused to test students with behavioral, learning, physical, or emotional issues, or were semi-selective about who they wanted to participate in a test. But most researchers didn't care. They tested everyone, including the mentally disabled. But one detail kept nagging at me. GATE. An acronym for Gifted and Talented Education. The whole reason I began to look for any sign of covert school experiments to begin with was because in early 2025, I came across many videos of former students of gifted and talented programs on social media detailing their strange memories of their time in their gifted and talented program. Memories like the teacher not belonging to the school faculty, unusual classroom activities such as playing with tangrams, learning Morse code, reading petroglyphs and hieroglyphics, reading upside down, and other odd activities. Some say they remember using Zener cards, the classic ESP cards. Some recall participating in meditation or guided visualization exercises led by their gifted teacher. Some say they remember putting on bulky headphones and listening to the gateway tapes, audio designed to induce out-of-body experiences. Others say they were forced to drink a pink chalky liquid, and many other strange memories. At the time, these experiences were just a part of being in a gifted program, but now as adults, the memory is an unsettling void to think about. Some former gifted students say they don't remember their time in the program at all. Many believe the program somehow suppressed their memories. All of these students, similar memories, but what does it all mean? Of course, people online began to theorize. The main theory? Gifted and talented programs had nothing to do with intelligence, but rather, these programs were designed to identify and experiment on students who displayed high levels of ESP or psychic ability. That's what people online were saying anyway. And this is an oddly specific conclusion, which at first I didn't believe at all. But I still found the rabbit hole interesting and began looking for any evidence of covert ESP experiments in classrooms. What I ended up uncovering proved what gifted students were speculating all along. Psychic experiments in schools were real, documented, and widespread. Yet, what I found complicates and deepens the story. See, the documented classroom experiments, the ones reported in Advances in Parapsychological Research and the Journal of Parapsychology, don't explicitly target gifted programs. They only seem to have tested general public schools. But an interesting observation is that they do refer to students who display high levels of ESP as gifted and sometimes even as talented. This could be a coincidence. But that leaves the question, why do so many former GATE students remember so many strange memories that coincide with some of the psychic testing uncovered in publications such as Advances in Parapsychological Research or the Journal of Parapsychology? Well, here's the theory. It's possible that mass testing in public schools wasn't the main objective, but rather the screening process. What if the real motive was to identify children who showed unusual psychic potential and then funnel them quietly into gifted and talented programs? And here's where it gets interesting. In my last video, I mentioned that I found multiple interesting connections that tie these documented covert ESP experiments to gifted and talented programs. Well, here's a big one that I'll reveal right now. Stanley Krippner, editor of Advances in Parapsychological Research, where these covert school experiments are detailed, the man associated with Stargate and the CIA, not only was he on the board of the Monroe Institute, the institute responsible for the Monroe tapes or the Gateway tapes, the same tapes that former GATE students remember listening to in their gifted and talented program. But Stanley Krippner also served on the board of the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children. Those worlds, parapsychology, the CIA, and gifted education, are intersections that shouldn't exist, but they do. And it raises a lot of questions. Stanley Krippner somehow has his hands in just about everything. Remember the first CIA document I found? Human Paranormal Capabilities? The one that casually mentions covert psychic experiments in American classrooms? Well, that was really a tiny part of the whole document. The rest of the article talks about how the CIA sent researchers to China to investigate a wave of so-called psychic children. One of the researchers they sent to China was Stanley Krippner. Like I said, CIA ties. The same man running dream telepathy sessions with rock stars was now tangled in intelligence operations, because in 1971, in a packed concert hall, Krippner teamed up with the Grateful Dead. He projected images above the stage, abstract shapes, symbols, visual triggers, and told the crowd to send those images telepathically to someone miles away, a receiver, asleep in the dream lab of Maimonides Medical Center. And according to Krippner, it worked. 4 out of the 6 nights, the sleeping subjects correctly identified the target images sent by the crowd from the concert. But before Stanley Krippner was studying dream telepathy with the Grateful Dead and embarking to China to study psychic kids, he was hypnotizing children. Not on stage, but in a university clinic. Krippner was the director of the Child Study Center at Kent University from 1961 through 1964. He used hypnosis to reduce anxiety in children. He implemented it for behavioral therapy, pain management, and to study imagination and dissociation. He believed altered states were the hidden code of human consciousness. If you could shift that code, with suggestion, with trance, with belief, more becomes possible. To Krippner, hypnosis isn't a parlor trick, it's a doorway. And Krippner has some secrets, like allegedly admitting to bathing in a bathtub with children, not his own children by the way. And this is the man who was on the board of the Monroe Institute and the board of the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children. Krippner is someone I'm going to heavily dissect in the next video, because once you examine him closely, he becomes kind of a compass. His connections point in every direction at once, and slowly a clear story emerges, because he's only one name of a much longer list, a web of individuals with strange affiliations, hidden resumes, and connections. This isn't about sensationalism, it's about following paper trails, because once you start tracking the key players involved, you realize you're swimming in waters that were never meant to be seen, let alone mapped. There are a lot of moving parts to this story, and it's about to get very dark. We're talking eugenics, hypnosis, memory suppression, experimental substances, gifted and talented programs, and a network of covert classroom psychic research and experiments. I've uncovered answers to some of the biggest questions people speculate about, but there's too much to cram into a single video, so I'm breaking this into a series to keep everything clear for first-time viewers. And if you're ready to go even deeper into this rabbit hole, stay until the end, because Danny from the YouTube channel Wicked Mysterious and I have built something special. Something for the people who want to peel back these layers week after week. I also appear on her latest video on gate programs, so definitely watch that after this. But before we continue, there's something you need to understand, something foundational. To make sense of the next episode, you have to know why gifted and talented programs exploded in the first place. And honestly, no one explains it better than Danny. So make sure you're subscribed to her channel. And without further ado,
when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik on October 4th, 1957, the United States went into a panic. This was both a technological embarrassment and an existential one. America's entire national identity was built on being the most advanced, the most intelligent, the most exceptional country on Earth. The idea that the Soviets could beat us to space rattled the foundation of that belief system. And so, almost overnight, education became a matter of national defense. In 1958, Congress passed the National Defense Education Act, or the NDEA, with a staggering $1 billion in funding, which is the equivalent of nearly $10 billion today. Its goal was to strengthen American education in science, math, and engineering, but the underlying intent was to produce minds capable of defending the nation, intellectually and technologically. Up until that point, education had been handled mostly by state and local districts. The NDEA marked the first time the federal government became involved in public schools and began shaping American school curriculum. At the time, NASA didn't even have enough scientists to compete at all in the space race. There was a critical shortage of mathematicians, and early computer programming was brand new, and that field required analytical thinkers trained specifically for defense applications. The demand for technical minds was so high that it drained the teaching profession itself. Professionals in these fields were recruited by the government to work in defense and intelligence agencies, and there was such a shortage of talent that there wasn't many teachers left to train the younger generation. By the time Apollo 11 landed on the moon in 1969, an entire generation had passed through NDEA-funded schools and universities. Many of those same engineers, physicists, and mission planners had been supported by the very system designed in response to Sputnik. They weren't just naturally gifted, they were hand-selected, trained, and molded under this Cold War education policy. With that funding came a new focus on identifying gifted children. At the time, giftedness was defined primarily by IQ, usually 130 or above, and those students were pushed into accelerated learning programs. The results were great. Graduation rates soared from 15% in 1950 to 40% by 1970. But there was something more going on, something more nefarious maybe, depending on how you look at it. The NDEA also created the first federal loan programs, and in its fine print was a loyalty clause. Under Title 10, Section 1001F, anyone receiving federal student aid had to swear an oath stating they did not support the overthrow of the U.S. government and pledged allegiance to the nation. In other words, your education was federally funded, but only if your allegiance to the country was too. Over 150 colleges protested, claiming the clause violated academic freedom. Harvard, Yale, and Princeton all refused NDA funding. The backlash was so strong that John F. Kennedy eventually repealed the oath in 1962. Still, this told us something more important about the national mindset. Intelligence itself was being treated as a resource that needed to be both cultivated and controlled. But once again, this was the age of Cold War paranoia. National defense was very much interested in the control of ideologies. American policymakers genuinely feared that communism could spread through intellectual circles, universities, and even public schools. The enemy wasn't another country, it was our own minds. They feared that subversion could happen from inside the classroom, disguised as a teacher questioning capitalism or a student thinking too independently. Gifted programs then became part of that larger machine, identifying bright students, but also observing which of those students conformed and which rebelled. From the 1950s through the 1970s, education in America took on an unmistakable tone of indoctrination. Textbooks were rewritten to present the U.S. as morally superior, capitalism as good, and any form of questioning as unpatriotic. Conservative school boards, particularly in Texas, which dominated national textbook markets, pressured publishers to sanitize or omit controversial topics altogether. Civil rights struggles, labor movements, and anti-war sentiment were often downplayed or erased completely. The FBI, CIA, and the House Un-American Activities Committee monitored universities for subversive influences. One of the largest players in that system was McGraw-Hill, the publisher who created those colorful SRA reading lab cards many of us remember. McGraw-Hill wasn't just an educational publisher. Their textbooks leaned heavily into pro-American, anti-communist narratives that celebrated obedience and patriotism as moral virtues. The company's founders, James McGraw and John Hill, were technocrats. They believed progress came from control by way of standardization and efficiency. In fact, prior to their school book contract, McGraw-Hill published industrial and military manuals. They also published restricted and classified documents for the Department of Defense and Office of War Information. Their military manuals were written from a technological and control standpoint for military training, which was their forte, but applying that to children in public schools had the same effect. Thus began a concerning trend that turned public school teaching methods into more of a training ground for technical application, changing historical facts to train children how and what to think. McGraw-Hill had become a gatekeeper of how the nation's children learned to think, or more accurately, what they were allowed to think. As a very interesting aside, Robert Maxwell, the man who partnered with McGraw-Hill in 1989 to create Macmillan McGraw-Hill School Publishing Company, was the father of Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine later became notorious for her association with financier Jeffrey Epstein, who was convicted of trafficking minors and accused of running a network that exploited children for powerful clients. Robert Maxwell himself was a suspiciously powerful and controversial figure in both media and intelligence circles. Maxwell, who was born Jan Ludwig Hoch, was a Jewish Czechoslovak who fled his Nazi-occupied country to join the British Army. After the war, he worked for the British Foreign Office's Information Research Department, a propaganda and psychological warfare division. He was a member of Parliament in the UK in the 1960s and then went on to build a publishing empire that included Macmillan Inc. and a chain of British newspapers. This, unfortunately, gave him both political influence and access to sensitive information. According to multiple investigative journalists and biographers, Maxwell was involved with more than one intelligence agency, like MI6 and possibly even the KGB. When he died under mysterious circumstances in 1991, investigators discovered that he embezzled hundreds of millions of pounds. This money was taken from his company's pension funds, effectively looting the retirement savings of his own employees. There is no verified evidence that Robert Maxwell had any influence on or involvement with what his daughter Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein were accused of. Still, the link between one of the major school textbook publishers and one of the largest trafficking rings is terrifyingly suspicious, to say the least. But back in public schools, small rituals were introduced to reinforce this ideological training. The Daily Pledge of Allegiance, something that every child has memorized long before even understanding its meaning, is one example of this. In 1954, President Eisenhower added the words "under God" specifically to differentiate the U.S. from the, quote, godless Soviet Union. The Morning Pledge wasn't just an excuse in patriotism, it was a psychological tool, and it was designed to instill loyalty, obedience, and a national unity from the earliest age. By 1969, the U.S. Office of Education, which would later become today's Department of Education, launched a study to evaluate just how well the NDEA was meeting the needs of exceptional students. The result, published in 1972, became known as the Marland Report. For the first time, the federal government officially redefined giftedness beyond just IQ scores. It described gifted children as those with high potential in any of 6 areas, and those were intellectual ability, specific academic aptitude, creativity or productive thinking, leadership ability, visual and performing arts, and psychomotor ability. This acknowledged that intelligence was much more than standardized testing could ever measure, and now included creativity, leadership, innovation, and even artistic expression. The Marland Report became the foundation for how schools still define gifted today. So this raises an important question. If the original goal of gifted education was national defense, what did it mean now that the definition had changed? Were schools still cultivating future scientists, or were they cultivating talents that could be channeled towards state interests, whether in technology, ideology, or perhaps even psychic warfare? Title V of the NDEA is a very interesting clause. It provided funding to hire more guidance counselors for elementary schools. These guidance counselors were specifically trained on identifying gifted students early on in their academic life. They were also taught how to give and interpret standardized tests, from IQ tests to tests on personality and interests. The guidance counselor's role was to first identify and then flag and track gifted students for special support programs. But they not only tracked intellect, they also had training on emotional and behavioral assessments. They were required to report this information to local school boards, state departments of education, and federal agencies, such as the Office of Education. Parents were left entirely in the dark and often were not aware that their children's information was being shared with state and federal officials. They also didn't know that they were given psychological testing or military occupation tracks. In 1974, Congress passed FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which finally gave parents parents the legal right to see, correct, or challenge their children's school records. But it did not change the pipeline of children's information from the school system straight to the feds. In 2001, No Child Left Behind forced standardized testing and reporting from all public schools. Detailed performance on students was sent to state and federal databases, but it mostly contains information about academics. However, that same year, the Patriot Act allowed federal agencies to access educational records without consent if it was tied to national security. FERPA was then amended to allow this access. In 2005, the Statewide Longitudinal Data System, or SLDS, was funded by the Department of Education to make a giant tracking database of every child in public schools, all the way from preschool to college. They track test scores, attendance, IEPs, and behavioral information. All 50 states have federal grants for this program, but only about 33 states use them. Meanwhile, 9 more states are ramping up to implement it. They even use personally identifiable data to match records to colleges and workforce agencies. They sometimes even use juvenile justice systems too. So while FERPA allowed families to access the information, where the information goes is still a huge problem. There is now a permanent record that follows you from childhood to your career. You have no say in it, and you can't opt out of it. Parents are not even allowed to opt their children out of it.
If you're into this gifted and talented program rabbit hole or school experiment rabbit hole in general, well, I have a surprise, because Danny from Wicked Mysterious and I have officially teamed up. We've created a podcast dedicated to this research. Here's the thing. On this channel, I do everything. The research, the writing, the editing, the recording, all of it. So videos take time. But in terms of how far ahead I am, I'm sitting on about 3 to 4 videos worth of findings, layers I haven't shared yet, files I haven't shown. And that's why we made this podcast. It's called Gate Unlocked Restricted Access. It's where Danny and I will share everything as we discover it. You'll see what files we're digging through, what new names keep coming up, but more importantly, the information that you've been dying to know. Now, if you want to talk to us directly, if you want updates into all of this weekly, not monthly, this podcast is for the deep divers. Don't worry, I'm still going to make school experiment videos for YouTube, but like I said, they'll take time. Here's a little video with all the information you need to support our podcast. I promise you, we're going to take you deeper than you think. This is Gate Unlocked Restricted Access.
Hi, I'm Danny. You might know me as Wicked Mysterious on YouTube.
And you might know me as Cryptid Candy on YouTube.
If you went to a public school, you might have been part of a covert operation that tested for psychic ability. And if you were in a gifted and talented program, you found the only place on the internet dedicated to providing answers to all of your questions.
We've already shown you the actual proof. Institutions and various researchers really did conduct secret psychic experiments in classrooms across the United States.
But we can confidently tell you that proving that this rabbit hole is real was only the surface layer.
We're examining documents that no one else on the internet has uncovered, and now you can join us on that research.
And our weekly podcast will be guiding you through the documents that contain the actual proof of secret psychic experiments in schools.
We're going to examine every angle of these classroom experiments. We're going to find out exactly what researchers were doing, why they were doing it, what they found out, and we're also going to be tracking and connecting all the key players involved. And yes, we'll be investigating the interesting relationship between those experiments and gifted and talented programs.
We both get emails all the time asking us what else we know pertaining to these covert classroom ESP experiments. Well, now you can know everything that we know.
Creating a YouTube video takes a very long time for both of us because we both research, write, record, and edit our own videos. So to put it simply, what Danny and I know about school experiments goes a lot deeper than anything that we've posted on YouTube.
As a patron, you'll get weekly updates on every new document, lead, and discovery we uncover through our podcast.
Now you're not waiting 2 months for me to drop a video about school experiments. You can stay up to date with everything that we know. And trust me, we're finding new things out all the time. Things that sometimes don't make it onto YouTube.
And you'll also get access to our exclusive Discord dedicated to this research. As a higher tier patron, you'll get access to all the files we're investigating. We'll be directly dropping them into your inbox, and your questions will be prioritized, answered right inside our podcast.
At the highest tier, you can even join us on the show, share your experiences, or ask us your questions live.
Being a patron will help us fund all the research we're doing. If you want the full story, and if you want to follow this investigation as it unfolds, and if you want to help uncover what really happened inside America's classrooms, you're in the right place.
So yes, the podcast will be exclusively on Patreon. Again, I'm going to keep creating these videos for YouTube, so no worries if you don't want to join. You watching, liking, and commenting my videos is more than enough support. I also want to thank Danny for featuring in this video. Please check out her channel, Wicked Mysterious. I also featured on her latest video covering gifted and talented programs, so be sure to watch her video on this subject as well. So if you want to talk to me and Danny directly, the podcast will be the best way to do so. The first episode of Gate Unlocked will be out next week. All the links will be in my description. But for now, as always, I will see you in the next one.